Come inside, quickly. It's not safe out here.
No man wanted her until the wild mountain man said, "Stay with me and give me strong sons now." The wind swept across Bitter Pine Valley with that early spring bite that still stung like winter. Clara Holt braced herself against it as she stepped out of Miller's Mercantile, a small burlap sack of herbs and thread tucked under her arm. Snowmelt had turned the dirt road into a brown slurry, splashing her hem with every step. She didn't mind. She was used to mud, used to walking alone, used to being overlooked. What she wasn't used to, though she tried hard to pretend, was the way people's eyes slid right past her. As though she were a smudge on a windowpane instead of a woman standing in full view. A pair of ranch hands leaned against the trough, talking too loudly. "Shame," one said, tilting his chin toward her. "A woman her age should have had a husband by now." The other snorted. "Husband? You mean someone to work himself to death and get nothing but silence in return? No thanks." Their laughter followed her like a burr caught in wool. Clara kept her back straight and walked on. She had learned long ago that Bitter Pine Valley had no place for soft hearts or quiet souls. The prettiest girls married by 18. The bold ones caught the attention of cattle barons. The talkative ones charmed shopkeepers and widowers. Clara wasn't pretty, bold, or talkative. She was useful, which somehow counted for less. She treated sick calves and stitched ripped jackets. She balanced ledgers better than the blacksmith's son and could split kindling cleaner than most men. People used her skills, respected her work, and then forgot her the moment she turned away. Her father used to say, "Your worth isn't measured in eyes that notice you but in hands that need you." But her father had been gone 5 years now, leaving behind a tiny cabin, a small patch of land no one wanted, and a daughter the town pitied without ever helping. Today that pity felt heavier than usual. The supply wagon from High Creek, her only source of certain medicines and special herbs, was 2 weeks overdue. Rumors buzzed around town. Washed out in a storm, attacked by wolves, snowed in at the mountain pass. No one knew. No one cared enough to find out. Clara cared. Her livelihood depended on those supplies. Without them, she would soon struggle to buy flour, kerosene, even the thread she needed to mend clothing for others. And then the sheriff announced it at the hitching post while men warmed their hands by the stove. Trails blocked in the upper pass. Ice took out the crossing. Anyone going up there risks their neck. The men grunted, swore, and turned back to their coffee. Clara felt her stomach drop. If no one went up the pass, the wagon would remain stranded. If the wagon remained stranded, her winter-grown herbs wouldn't reach their buyers in High Creek. And if they didn't reach those buyers, the debt on her cabin would swallow her whole. She could already feel the noose of poverty tightening. Mrs. Rourke, the seamstress, touched Clara's elbow. "If you'd been friendlier to Widower Harper," she whispered, "you wouldn't be in this situation." Clara blinked slowly. "He asked if I'd scrub his floors for free before he asked if I'd marry him." "Well," Mrs. Rourke sniffed, "no man wants a wife who talks back." The words stung, but Clara only nodded, swallowing against the burn in her throat. She spent the afternoon going from place to place, offering to trade work for firewood or flour. Some accepted. Others shrugged vaguely. Everyone seemed distracted by preparations for the spring cattle drive. No one saw how close she truly was to losing everything. By dusk, Clara trudged up the hill toward her cabin, the sky painted soft lavender and gold. Smoke drifted from chimneys below, warm pockets of life she'd never been fully welcomed into. Her cabin sat at the edge of the tree line, small but sturdy, built by her father's calloused hands. She paused on the step, pressing her palm to the door. "This is all I have left," she whispered. Inside, the room smelled of pine sap and dried lavender. A kettle of thin stew simmered weakly on the small stove. She sat at the table, lit a single lantern, and stared at the numbers in her ledger. They didn't lie. If the supply wagon didn't come, if she couldn't deliver the medicines she'd promised the ranch families, she would lose her cabin by summer. A heavy knock startled her. It was Ben Whistler, the sheriff's deputy. Young, nervous, hat in his hands. "Evenin', Clara," he said. "Sorry to bother you. Got a message from Doc Weller." She braced herself. "More bad news always." "There's a man in the mountains, Lynx Maddox," Ben continued, shifting uneasily. "Hermit. Trapper. Folks call him wild, but Doc says he's bad sick. Fever. Might not last the week." Clara frowned. "Why tell me?" Ben kicked at a patch of dirt on her porch. "Doc needs someone to take medicine up to him. None of the men are willing." Clara stared. "Why?" "Because Maddox is unpredictable. Lives alone. barely comes down from the timberline. Some say he fought off 3 grizzlies. Some say he chased off a gang with nothing but an axe. Clara lifted an eyebrow. And he's sick enough to need medicine? Ben nodded. Fever's so bad he sent a message down with one of his hunting dogs. Nearly unheard of. Means he's desperate. Clara's pulse thudded in her ears. A dangerous man in the mountains. A deadly storm season. I see trails. Equals a mission no one wanted. Which meant the job would fall to the only person the town considered expendable. You're the only healer brave enough, Ben added gently. Doc Weller can't make that climb with his bad leg. Clara inhaled slowly. If she delivered the medicine, Doc would pay her. If she got paid, she could make her cabin payment on time. If she saved Lynx Maddox, she would have at least done something good. Something right. All right, she whispered. I'll go. Ben's eyes widened. You sure? No man wants the job. She lifted her chin. So I'll take it. Ben tipped his hat, relieved. You leave at sunrise. Storms rolling in by afternoon. When he left, Clara locked the door behind him and leaned her forehead against the wood. A wild mountain man. A treacherous climb. A desperate mission. She wasn't fearless. She wasn't strong in the way bitter pine men define strength. But she was determined. And determination, she'd learned, could be a mightier weapon than a revolver. Clara sat at the edge of her bed, boots still on, lantern light flickering against her face. Tomorrow she would climb into a world of danger, snow, and shadows. Because if she didn't, everything she had left would crumble. And so the woman no man wanted would become the only woman, brave enough to knock on the door of the wild mountain man the valley feared. The trail to Timberfall Ridge was never meant for a woman traveling alone. Certainly not in late winter when every breath came out as white steam and the wind whistled like a warning spirit through the pines. Clara wrapped her father's old wool coat tighter around her and trudged through knee-deep drifts. Each step crunched loudly, echoing in the silent forest. Her satchel bounced against her hip. Inside it, carefully wrapped in wool, were the medicines Doc Weller had entrusted to her. Don't lose them, he had warned. They'll be the difference between life and death. She hadn't slept much, rising before dawn to begin the climb. Her muscles burned, her cheeks stung, and the sky above was that dangerous metallic gray that meant snow was on its way soon. But she kept moving. The deeper she went into the mountains, the more she felt watched, not by people but by the land itself. Towering pines, frozen creeks, tracks in the snow. Elk, rabbit, fox. She saw claw marks on a birch tree and shivered. Bears were supposed to be sleeping, but the hungry ones woke early. Timberfall Ridge rose before her like a jagged spine. Somewhere up there, Lynx Maddox lay fevered and alone. No one had told her much about him, only scraps of stories. He's half wolf. He was raised by the mountains. He trusts no one. He's dangerous when cornered. And yet, when his hunting dog, a massive black-furred creature with intelligent amber eyes, had appeared in town carrying a scrap of cloth tied to its collar, people had gone silent as tombstones. The town might not have cared whether Clara lived or died. But a sick, isolated man was still a human life. Someone had to go. So she went. Hours later, her legs trembling from the climb, Clara finally spotted the first sign of Lynx Maddox's territory, a series of carved notches in tree trunks, worn by weather but unmistakably intentional. Beyond them, the snow grew deeper and the forest quieter, as though even nature held its breath. A low growl broke the silence. Clara froze. The dog stepped out from behind a fallen log, hackles raised. The same one who brought the message. Massive. Protective. Eyes tracking her every move. Clara's heart thudded. Dog sensed fear. She slowly lifted her hands. It's all right. I'm here to help your master. The dog's ears twitched. He sniffed her glove, then gently tugged her coat sleeve. Show me the way, she whispered. With a low grunt, the beast turned and padded through the snow. She followed. After another half-hour they reached it. A hand-built cabin of rough-hewn logs, nestled against an outcrop of granite, smoke barely puffing from the crooked chimney. A wooden lean-to held stacks of cured hides, traps, and tools. The place radiated rugged solitude. Clara swallowed hard. This is where he lives? Alone? The dog nudged the door with his snout. It creaked open. Inside the air was thick, fever heat, sweat, and smoke from a fire left to burn too low. Clara stepped over the threshold softly. And there he was. Lynx Maddox lay on a narrow bed, tangled in blankets, his powerful frame shuddering with chills. He was larger than any man in Bitter Pine, broad-shouldered, rough-bearded, scar crisscrossing one cheek like a mark of survival. His hair was dark, long and tangled. His jaw was unshaven. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He looked every bit the wild mountain man they whispered about. But he also looked human. Vulnerable. Suffering. Clara approached slowly. "Mr. Maddox? I'm Clara Holt. I was sent to bring you medicine." His eyes snapped open, startlingly bright, a stormy blue like a frozen river. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Who?" His voice was hoarse raw. "Who sent you?" "Doc Weller. You sent your dog. You needed help." He stared at her, confused, fever-glazed. "Didn't think anyone would come." Clara gently freed her wrist. "I came." He tried to sit up but groaned, falling back against the furs. The dog whined and placed his massive head on the man's shoulder. Clara knelt beside the bed, opening her satchel. "Your fever is dangerously high. I need to cool you down and get these tinctures in you." "You're not afraid?" he rasped. She paused. "Of what?" "A sick man in need." He blinked as if the concept were foreign. "People don't come up here." "Well," Clara said, setting a cool cloth to his forehead, "I suppose I'm not like most people." A faint, weak smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She worked in silence for a while, mixing herbs, forcing small sips of willow bark brew past his lips, wiping sweat from his brow. Lynx watched her through half-lidded eyes, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm despite the cold. "You're small," he murmured. Clara stiffened, ready for yet another insult. "But strong," he finished. "Stronger than you look." She blinked, startled by the unexpected respect. "You climbed all the way here," he added. "Most men wouldn't." "I didn't have a choice," she said quietly. His gaze sharpened. "Everyone has a choice." Clara didn't respond. He didn't know her life. He didn't know how small choices were for a woman alone in a valley that dismissed her. The storm outside began to build, wind howling around the cabin walls like ghosts. She doubted she'd be able to leave anytime soon. As dusk settled, Lynx's eyelids grew heavy. He fought sleep long enough to whisper, "You saved my life." "I helped," she corrected softly. His hand brushed hers, rough, calloused, warm. "Why'd they send you?" he asked. "Because no one else would go." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Fools." Clara tucked the blankets around him. "Rest. I'll be here through the storm." He inhaled, slow and deep, as though the idea of someone staying was something he hadn't known he wanted until this moment. "You're not afraid of me?" he repeated, voice fading. Clara met his gaze, not the gaze of a monster or a legend, but a man who had lived too long without kindness. "No," she whispered. "Should I be?" Lynx's lips parted, surprise flickering across his face. "No. Never, of me." And then his eyes slipped closed. Clara sat beside him, listening to the crackling fire and the rising wind outside. She didn't know what the coming days would bring, but she sensed something shifting, something she couldn't name yet. She had come to save a stranger. But she didn't know then. She was also awakening something in him, something wild, loyal, and impossible to ignore. The storm hit with a violence neither Clara nor Lynx anticipated. By nightfall, the wind screamed against the mountain cabin like a living thing clawing for entry. Snow slammed against the shuttered windows in thick waves, rattling the iron hinges. The fire hissed and spat as drafts crept through cracks between the logs. The temperature plummeted so sharply that Clara could see her breath each time she exhaled. Inside, Lynx Maddox burned. His fever had risen steadily since dusk, turning the wild mountain man into a restless, sweating, thrashing shadow of himself. Clara moved from fire to bedside, bedside to stove, stove to table, mixing teas, cooling cloths, applying salves, whispering soothing words like one would to a frightened animal. Lynx was frightening in his size and raw strength. But illness had made him vulnerable, disoriented, dependent. And Clara had never been depended on like this in her life. "Easy," she murmured as he gripped the edge of the blankets, body shaking. "It's just the fever pulling at you." His voice, a rough, broken growl, emerged from cracked lips. "Too hot, can't?" He tugged at his shirt, trying to pull it off but lacking the coordination. Clara helped, cheeks flushing as she eased the damp fabric off his burning skin. His torso was all hard muscle beneath scars, old ones white and pale and newer ones raw pink from fresh battles with the wilderness. He didn't look like any man she'd tended before. He looked carved from the very mountain stone he lived upon. She forced her thoughts back to the task. She was here to heal. Nothing more. "Drink this," she said, lifting his head so he could swallow the tincture. He obeyed weakly, eyes half open, unfocused. And then the fever took him deeper. His breathing quickened. His hands clenched and unclenched. He murmured under his breath, "I can't lose anyone else." Clara's heart tightened. Loss was a language she understood fluently. "It's all right," she whispered, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "You're safe. I'm right here." His eyes opened, wild, stormy blue, but not fully present. Not seeing her. Seeing someone else entirely. "Don't leave," he rasped. "I won't," she promised. "I'll stay until the storm passes." Her voice must have slipped directly into whatever fever dream held him, because his grip shot out, strong despite his weakness. His hand wrapped around her wrist, pulling her closer. His chest heaved with each breath, his eyes burning with a fierce, desperate need, not for possession, but for survival. "Stay with me," he breathed, raw and broken. "And give me strong sons." The words hit the small cabin like a gunshot. Clara froze. Her breath caught. Her heart slammed against her ribs. He wasn't present enough to realize what he'd said. He wasn't asking her, not truly. He was lost in fevered memories, old wounds, old expectations, perhaps words someone had once demanded of him. But still, her stomach twisted with shock, with hurt, with the sting of Bitter Pine Valley's cruel whispers echoing in her mind. No man wants her. She'll never have children. She'd be lucky if anyone wanted her for anything. To hear those words from him, even in fever, felt like a knife made of those old insults twisting inside her. She pulled back, hand trembling. "Lynx, you don't know what you're saying." He slumped against the furs, unconscious again, breath ragged. But Clara wasn't unconscious. She felt every heartbeat, every old wound reopening. The storm howled louder, pushing snow against the door. Clara stepped away from the bed, pressing a hand to her chest. She wasn't angry with him. How could she be? He was delirious, lost to fever. But she was angry with the world that made men believe a woman's only worth was in her womb. Angry that even up here, in a place untouched by Bitter Pine Valley's gossip, those same expectations still found her. She turned away, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. The massive hunting dog padded toward her, sensing her distress. He nudged her hand gently. Clara whispered, "He didn't mean it." "I know he didn't." Even so, she wrapped her arms around herself for warmth and steadied her breath. Hours passed. She kept tending him, wringing cloths, spooning medicine, stoking the fire, because her heart was kind even when bruised. Near dawn, the fever finally broke. Lynx's breathing steadied. His head turned on the pillow. His eyes fluttered open, clearer than before. And the first thing he saw was Clara sitting beside him, dark circles under her eyes, hair escaping its braid, exhaustion etched into every line of her face, but still there. His voice was hoarse but present. Understanding. Grounded. "You stayed," he whispered. Clara didn't smile. "Couldn't." "You were very sick," she said quietly. "You needed help." He studied her closely, confusion flickering over his face. "Something's wrong." She swallowed. "You said something, during the fever?" Lynx frowned. "What did I say?" Her hands twisted together in her lap. "You asked me to stay with you and give you sons." Silence. A long, stunned silence. Lynx's face burned red, not from fever this time but from mortification. He sat up quickly, then winced, grabbing his ribs. "Clara," he whispered, voice rough with shame, "I swear on every bone in my body, I didn't mean that. I don't even remember saying it." "I know," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I wasn't asking anything of you," he continued, desperation creeping into his tone. "I'd never demand anything like that. Not from you. Not from any woman." Clara looked up at him then, truly looked. He wasn't embarrassed because she rejected him. He was mortified he had hurt her. His hand hovered near hers, unsure. "Please tell me I didn't frighten you." "You didn't," she said softly. "Just surprised me." He exhaled shakily. Relief washed over his features. "I don't want you for sons," he said gently. "I don't want you for anything except what you choose freely." Her throat tightened. "And what do you want?" she whispered. Lynx swallowed hard. His voice dropped to something softer than she thought a man like him could manage. "I want you to stay, until the storm ends, so I can learn to speak without sounding like a beast. And so I can thank you properly when I'm not half dead." Clara's heart softened, tension melting from her shoulders. She nodded. "I'll stay. Until the storm ends." Lynx leaned back against the headboard, eyes on her, not fevered, not wild, but grateful. Almost tender. Outside, the storm began to quiet. But inside the cabin, something else was awakening, slow, cautious, unexpected. The first fragile thread of trust between a woman no one wanted, and a man who had never wanted anyone beside him. Until now. Morning crept into the cabin as a thin wash of silver light pressed through the frost-coated windows. The storm had quieted sometime before dawn, leaving behind a muffled world blanketed in thick snow. Inside, the fire had burned low, and Clara's breath came out in wisps as she rose from the chair where she'd slept sitting up. Her back ached. Her legs tingled in pins and needles. Her eyes felt gritty from exhaustion. But Lynx Maddox was breathing evenly now. And that was enough. She moved to the bedside, checking his temperature with the back of her hand. Warm but safe. His cheeks had regained color, not the fevered flush of the night before, but the living, healthy color of a man returning from the edge. He stirred. Clara froze, hand halfway lifted from his forehead. Lynx's eyes opened slowly, clear, steady, aware. He looked at her in that quiet, direct way he seemed to do everything. His voice was low, rough from sleep. You stayed. You needed tending. He studied her face for a long moment, gaze drifting to the exhaustion she tried to hide. Dark circles under her eyes. The tightness in her jaw. The strain of a night spent battling illness and fear. He cleared his throat. You didn't sleep. Clara shrugged. I dozed. He glanced at the chair she'd been curled in. That's not sleeping. That's punishing your body. She stiffened. My body is fine. Lynx's eyes softened in a way that startled her. You shouldn't have to hurt yourself taking care of a man like me. Clara drew in a small, steadying breath. A man like you deserves care as much as anyone. He blinked, stunned by the simple sincerity of her words. No one had ever said something like that to him. She didn't know that, but the honesty in her voice hit him like sunlight breaking through cloud. His hand lifted slightly as if wanting to touch her but unsure of the right. His fingers dropped back to the blanket. You have a kindness that scares people, he said quietly, because they don't know what to do with it. The words slipped under her ribs. Warm. Unexpected. Disarming. Clara stepped back, flustered. We should get your strength up. You'll need food. She moved to the hearth, stirring embers back to life. Lynx watched her with a level of attention that made her nervous, not because she felt unsafe but because she felt seen. No man in Bitter Pine Valley had ever looked at her like that. As the cabin warmed, she pulled out dried venison and root vegetables from Lynx's stores. She chopped them efficiently, the rhythmic thunk-thunk of the knife echoing softly through the small space. Lynx cleared his throat again. You cook like you've done it for an army. My father was big, she answered. He ate like 3 men. Lynx smiled faintly. You fed him well then? I tried. Do you miss him? The question was gentle, almost hesitant. Most people avoided soft topics with Clara, as if assuming she didn't feel them. Her voice lowered. Every day. Lynx watched her stir the pot, saw the way her shoulders tightened at the admission, and something instinctive stirred inside him. Protectiveness, fierce and primal. Not the fevered desperation of last night. Something clearer. Steadier. Clara, he said, voice deepening, I'm sorry for what I said while the fever had me. She paused, spoon hovering above the pot. I know you didn't mean it, she murmured. But it still hurt. She didn't deny it. Didn't soften it. Lynx sat straighter in the bed, muscles flexing as he braced his arms behind him. You deserve to hear it plainly. You owe me nothing. Not sons. Not company. Not anything. I won't be like the men who only see what you can do for them. Clara's throat tightened. He didn't know how close those words were to her unspoken wounds. She turned slightly. You were sick. I knew that. Sick or not, he said, I don't want you thinking you're here because I expect something from you. Clara looked at him, and for the first time, saw not the wild mountain man the valley whispered about, but a man trying awkwardly, clumsily to be good. Before she could respond, a sudden crack echoed outside. Her heart leapt. Lynx's expression hardened immediately, instincts sharpening. That wasn't snow. That was weight on frozen branches. An animal? Clara whispered. Or something tracking the scent of the storm. He tried to rise but winced, gripping the bed frame as pain shot through him. Clara moved quickly to steady him, one hand on his forearm. You're not going anywhere. You're barely standing. I can't let anything near the cabin, he said, jaw tight. Not with you here. Something enormous pressed against the snow just beyond the door, heavy, deliberate steps. The dog's ears shot up. A low growl rolled from its throat. Clara's pulse quickened. What do we do? Lynx reached under the bed, pulling out a long hunting knife and sliding it under his pillow. You stay behind me. No matter what. But you're sick. I fought worse sick. Before he could say more, the footsteps stopped just outside the cabin door. The air inside thickened. Everything went still. Clara could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The dog growled louder. Lynx's voice was a low, silent command, Clara. Behind me. But she didn't move. Something inside her refused to cower. Instead, she stepped closer to the fire poker, gripping it tightly, positioning herself beside the bed where she could defend him if needed. Lynx noticed. His eyes widened slightly, not in anger but in something like admiration. Before either of them could act, the door gave a sharp rattle. Then, silence. A long moment passed. Finally, the heavy steps drifted away into the snow, leaving only the faint echoes of retreat. Clara released the breath she'd been holding. Her shoulders sagged and her knees nearly buckled. Lynx reached out instinctively, catching her wrist before she could stumble. You're fearless, he murmured. Or stubborn. Both, she whispered. His hand stayed wrapped around her wrist, warm, strong, grounding. Neither of them moved. The storm had passed. But inside the cabin, a different kind of weather had begun. Quiet, warm, electric. Lynx's voice dropped to a low rumble. You're not what the valley says you are, Clara Holt. Her breath hitched. What am I then? His fingers slid down her wrist until her hand rested in his palm. You're a woman men underestimate because they can't see past their own smallness. Her pulse fluttered beneath his touch. Slow. Unmistakable. And you, she whispered. What do you see? Lynx held her gaze, steady, unflinching, reverent in a way that made her knees weak. A woman worth staying for, he said. Storm or not. Clara's heart trembled. And for the first time in her life, she believed a man might actually mean it. The storm finally broke after 6 unrelenting days. When Clara stepped outside Lynx's cabin that morning, the air was so clear it felt like glass. The world sparkled beneath a fresh blanket of snow, each pine limb frosted white, each breath turning into silver vapor. The mountains seemed almost peaceful. But Clara had lived enough winters to know that the moments after a storm could be the most dangerous of all. She pulled Lynx's heavy coat tighter around her shoulders. He had insisted she wear it. It's warm and you run cold, he'd said gruffly, but she knew the truth. He was worried about her. Always watching out for her now, ever since the fever broke. Inside, Lynx was repairing one of his traps, the scrape of his knife against metal steady and rhythmic. He lifted his head when she opened the door. Don't go far, he said. I won't, she promised, offering him a soft smile. Just need kindling for the stove. His brow furrowed in that way of his, concern hidden behind a mask of gruff practicality. I'll come with you. You've barely eaten since yesterday, she countered. Finish your food. I'll be right outside. Before he could protest, she slipped out into the crisp morning. The silence before trouble. Clara moved between the pines, collecting small fallen branches, humming a tune under her breath. The forest felt impossibly quiet, too quiet, she realized. No chatter of nearby birds, no distant crack of hooves through the trees. A prickling unease crawled up her spine. She straightened slowly, scanning the woods. That's when she heard it, voices. Oh, Mel. Close. Her heart stumbled. Men didn't belong up here. Not honest men anyway. She set down the bundle of wood just as 3 figures stepped out from behind the trees, each with rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders, each wearing the hard, hungry expressions of men who lived without law. The outlaws. Lynx had warned her about them. Well now, the first man drawled, lips curling into a grin. Look what Maddox has been hiding up here. Clara's blood went cold. The outlaw circle. The second outlaw stepped closer, eyes raking over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Didn't know the mountain man had himself a woman. I'm not, Clara began, but the first man cut her off. Now don't lie. A pretty thing like you doesn't come up this mountain for no reason. I brought medicine, Clara said firmly. Nothing more. They laughed. The youngest outlaw leaned his rifle against a tree. Medicine girl, huh? We need medicine too. Seems fair you share some with us. I don't have any, she said, stepping back. Then maybe you can share something else. The man reached for her wrist. Clara's breath hitched. The mountain man arrives. A crack split the air. Not thunder. A rifle. The outlaws froze. A second later, Lynx Maddox stepped into the clearing, silent and deadly as a wolf, rifle aimed with unshakable precision. His jaw was clenched, eyes burning with a feral, protective fury Clara had never seen before, fury born not of violence but fear. Fear for her. If any one of you touches her, Lynx said, voice a low rumble, you'll learn exactly why this mountain fears me. The outlaw gripping Clara released her so fast she nearly stumbled. The leader raised his hands slowly. Easy now, Maddox. No need for violence. You brought violence with you, Lynx growled. You came onto my land. You cornered someone under my protection. You don't get to walk away without understanding what that means. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone in the valley had heard the stories. Lynx had once driven off a pack of wolves with nothing but a knife. Lynx had survived a winter with a shattered leg. Lynx had no fear of man or beast. And the look in his eyes now said those stories didn't come close to the truth. The retreat. The leader swallowed. We don't want trouble. Then leave, Lynx said. Now. The youngest outlaw went pale. He snatched up his rifle and backed away. The other two followed, hands lifted, steps quickening as they disappeared between the pines. The moment they were gone, Lynx lowered his gun, but his entire body was still coiled tight, like a storm barely held at bay. Clara exhaled shakily. The aftermath. Lynx strode to her, hands trembling as he grasped her shoulders. Did they hurt you? No, she whispered. You came just in time. His breath shuddered out. He pulled her against his chest, just for a moment, just long enough for her to hear the wild pounding of his heart. Clara, he cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek with unbearable gentleness. I thought I'd lose you. Emotion tightened her throat. No one's ever worried for me like that. No one ever saw you clearly, he said, voice low and fierce. But I do. And I swear on this mountain, no harm will ever come to you while I live. Her breath caught. Not because of the danger, but because of the truth she heard in his voice, raw, unpolished, sincere. In that moment, clarity washed through her like sunlight breaking over snow. She wasn't afraid of Lynx. Not his roughness. Not his wildness. Not his past. What terrified her was how safe he made her feel, and how badly she wanted to stay. The day Clara left the mountain, the world seemed colder than it had before the storm. She descended the narrow trail with her pack strapped across her back, stepping carefully over ice-crusted roots, her breath coming in soft puffs. Lynx walked with her as far as the ridge. He insisted, though she knew he hated every step that took her farther from him. When they reached the overlook, the entire valley stretched out below them, the ribbon of river winding through pine and meadow, the scatter of rooftops and bitter pine, the long road leading toward the railway station. Civilization. Noise. Expectations. Judgments. Clara's stomach twisted. This is where I leave you, Lynx said quietly. She turned to him. Snow melted in his hair from the rising sun. He looked like the mountains themselves, strong, stoic, impossible to ignore. And yet he stood there like a man afraid of losing something precious. You'll be safe down there? He asked. Yes, she said automatically, though she wasn't sure it was true. Safe from danger? Yes. Safe from ridicule? No. Safe from loneliness? Absolutely not. He nodded, jaw tightening. If you need anything, you come back up this mountain, you hear? Clara managed a smile. I know. But the gleam in his eyes told her he didn't want her to just come back for help. He wanted her to come back for him. She felt the same pull, raw and real, but fear tugged at her too. Fear of wanting too much. Fear of being wanted back. Lynx took a step closer, breath warming the cold morning air between them. Clara, his voice cracked like a branch under weight. I don't know how to say things the right way. I don't know how to court someone. But I know this, your leaving feels wrong. Her heart clenched. Lynx. I'll wait, he said simply. As long as it takes. Even if it's forever. The words hit her like warmth after frostbite. She swallowed hard, lifted a hand, and brushed her fingertips against his cheek, a soft touch for a man who had known so little gentleness. Then she turned and walked toward the town. She didn't look back. If she did, she wasn't sure she'd have the strength to keep going. The town whispers. By the time Clara reached Bitter Pine, her boots were soaked, her pack heavy, and her face wind-burnt. She pushed open the door to the general store, expecting silence. Instead, she felt every gaze snap toward her at once. There she is, back from Maddox's mountain. She stayed 6 days up there. With him. Alone. Did he keep her? Did he? Clara stiffened, jaw clenching. Mr. Harwell, the storekeeper, cleared his throat awkwardly. Everything all right, Miss Holt? She met his gaze. He flinched. So that's the story going around? she asked, voice steady. That Lynx Maddox forced me to stay? The townspeople shifted uncomfortably. Clara stepped forward, shoulders squared, voice ringing with a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. He did not force me to do anything. He was sick, terribly sick. I saved his life. And when outlaws came, he protected mine. Murmurs rippled. So no, Clara continued. He didn't keep me. He respected me. More than any man in this valley ever has. The room fell silent. For the first time in her life, Clara saw something other than dismissal in their eyes. Shame. The lonely return home. Her cabin felt smaller than she remembered. Emptier. Colder. She lit a fire. She paced. She tried to eat. She couldn't. Everything, every quiet corner, every empty shelf, seemed to echo with the absence of a man she had only known a short time but had come to trust more deeply than she'd trusted anyone. That night, she sat by the window, staring toward the mountains. A thin line of smoke rose from the distant ridge. Lynx's cabin. His fire. His world. The only place she'd felt truly seen. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her chest. What am I doing? She whispered. The next morning she tried to focus on chores, patching a torn skirt, mending a hole in her roof, sweeping the floor. But her mind kept drifting back to the moment Lynx had cupped her face in the woods, his voice raw with emotion. I swear on this mountain, no harm will ever come to you while I live. The memory struck something deep inside her, something tender and long neglected. By noon, Clara stopped pretending. She packed her belongings. Every stitch of clothing. Every book. Every tiny thing that represented the life she had tried, unsuccessfully, to build here. She looked around one last time. And then she left. The moonlit climb. The trail was harder at night, but Clara felt a strange surge of strength. The moon hung full above the mountains, silvering the snow-dusted trees, lighting her path like a guiding lantern. She stumbled once. Twice. She scraped her palm on a rock. But she kept climbing. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't running away from something. She was running toward someone. Her breath puffed white in the cold air as she reached the ridge, the spot where Lynx had said goodbye. She paused, catching her breath. A soft glow flickered through the trees. His cabin. Warm. Alive. Waiting. Clara straightened her pack and walked toward the light. You came back. Lynx opened the door before she could knock. He stood there, chest rising unevenly, eyes wide as if he couldn't believe she was real. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lynx stepped forward, voice breaking. You came back. Clara nodded, tears gathering. I chose to. His breath shuddered out as if those words unraveled something tight inside him. He lifted a hand slowly, as though afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast, and brushed a tear from her cheek. I don't know what I did to deserve that, he whispered. You were yourself, she said. That's all. He exhaled a laugh, rough, incredulous, soft. Then he stepped aside, opening the door fully. Come home, Clara. She walked in. The door closed behind her. And the mountains felt, finally, blessedly, right again. The weeks that followed Clara's return to the mountain unfolded like the slow thaw of winter, steadily, softly, quietly transforming everything. Lynx had always lived in harsh solitude, his world shaped by survival, not comfort. But with Clara beside him, the cabin changed faster than he expected. Or maybe it was he who changed. The making of a home. On the first morning after she returned, Clara rose before dawn. She found Lynx already awake, sharpening a blade by the dying fire. He startled when she approached, as if still not used to the idea that she was real and not some dream conjured by a lonely heart. Good morning, she said gently. He blinked, then nodded toward the kettle. I saved the last of the good coffee for you. She smiled, an expression that warmed the coldest corners of him. You didn't have to. Yes, he said simply. I did. Life settled into a rhythm. Clara organized the pantry, turning chaos into function. Lynx split extra wood, building up the stockpile until the shed was overflowing. She scrubbed years of dust from corners he'd barely noticed. He fixed the roof shingles he'd been ignoring for 3 seasons. She cooked meals that tasted like comfort. He taught her how to track elk and read the slope of the snow for hidden dangers. They moved around each other with a growing familiarity, an unspoken awareness that something deep and wordless was blooming between them. The cabin hummed with warmth where once it had only echoed with emptiness. A quiet confession. One night, after a long day repairing the chicken coop, they sat before the fire. Clara leaned her back against the hearthstones, boots off, toes warming. Lynx sat beside her on the floor, his shoulder brushing hers, a touch that sent a soft shiver through her. He cleared his throat, gaze fixed on the flames. You know, I still don't understand why you came back. She turned her head toward him. You really don't? His jaw flexed. I don't have much to offer. Lynx, Clara reached out, covering his calloused hand with hers. You offered respect, kindness, safety. A place where I mattered. He swallowed hard. You matter everywhere. No, she said softly. Not to them. But to you, yes. He looked at her then really looked. His eyes softened, losing their usual guarded edge. Clara, he whispered, voice low and reverent. I never want you to leave again. Her heart pulsed with quiet certainty. I don't plan to. The growing partnership. Spring arrived in slow bursts, melting drifts, swollen rivers, the first brave shoots pushing through the earth. With it came the need to rebuild Lynx's trading business. Clara took charge of the ledger, recording every sale, every trade, every supply needed. Lynx watched her work with awe. Do you know, he said one afternoon, I used to dread going into town. Never knew how to bargain properly. She smiled as she dipped her quill. You were too honest for your own good. You mean gullible. I mean fair. He stared at her for a moment before saying quietly, You make things easy that used to feel impossible. Clara felt her cheeks warm. Together they repaired the storage shed, built new drying racks for pelts, and created a workspace that was efficient and almost cheerful. Lynx found himself humming sometimes. Clara teased him for it. He didn't mind. The mountain felt less like a fortress now and more like a future. The first kiss. One evening as they walked the ridge to check trap lines, the sky blazed with streaks of orange and gold, clouds glowing like embers. A warm wind swept through the pines, carrying the scent of new growth. Clara paused at the overlook, the very place they had said goodbye weeks earlier. Lynx stopped beside her. The memory of that painful parting hung between them, raw and vivid. Clara inhaled deeply. I never want to feel that distance again. Lynx turned fully to her. His voice was rough. I don't ever want to watch you walk away again. Their eyes held. The wind quieted. The world seemed to still. Lynx lifted a hand, cupping her cheek with trembling gentleness. Clara, may I? She didn't let him finish. She rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, tender. Then Lynx pulled her closer, arms wrapping around her as if anchoring her to the earth itself. Warmth rushed through her, steady and thrilling. When they finally pulled apart, Lynx rested his forehead against hers, breath unsteady. I've wanted to do that since the moment you walked into my cabin, he admitted. Clara laughed softly. I know. A promise of forever. Summer came, painting the mountains in green. One late afternoon, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sun drift toward the peaks, Lynx took Clara's hands in his. You know, he said quietly, I've been thinking a lot about a family. Clara's breath caught. He saw it and his expression softened. Listen, he murmured, brushing her knuckles with his thumb. That night I said those words, about wanting strong sons. I was sick and talking nonsense. I don't want anything from you don't want to give. Not ever. Clara's eyes filled. Not with sadness, but with something bright and certain. I don't want to be pressured to give you sons, she said gently. I want to give you a life. He exhaled shakily, eyes full of something powerful and unguarded. And if that life includes children someday, she added softly, then it will be because we both chose it. Lynx's voice broke. I only want you, Clara. If it's just us forever, that's enough. More than enough. She leaned into him, letting his forehead rest against her temple. For a long moment, they watched the mountains together, solid, unshakable, ancient. So, Clara whispered, smiling against his shoulder, are you asking me something? Lynx drew in a breath, steadying his nerves. I'm asking you to stay, he said. Not just in my cabin, but in my life, as my partner, my equal, my heart. Clara turned toward him, eyes shining. Then my answer, she said, is yes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if anchoring himself to the greatest miracle he'd ever known. The final image. Months later, travelers passing through the mountains told stories. Of a once wild trapper now seen smiling, building a new cabin beside the old one, larger, warmer, with a porch big enough for 2 rocking chairs. Of a woman with a gentle voice and strong spine who traded herbs and remedies, who nursed the injured and soothed the lost. Of the 2 walking the ridge together each evening, side by side as if they had been carved from the same mountain stone. And so the woman no man wanted became the woman one man loved so fiercely, so tenderly and so completely. that the mountains themselves seemed to echo with their happiness.